to, and he said, you know I'm coming. And I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. I said, you know I'm building one house in Mayapur. He said, Acha? And then he wanted to know every square inch of the house. I said, above the Goshala. And that intrigued him even more. It was the first householder house actually to be built. And he wanted to know every room, every room. He asked every square inch. And after every question, he said, the room, they are small. I'd never seen it because I'd been gone for months and Aviram was making it. And he'd say, the rooms, they're small. I said, there's a bedroom, a dressing room, the living room, veranda, kitchen. And every time I would just go, yes, Prabhupada. And then go to the next room. It is small? Yes, Prabhupada. And I kept thinking, Aviram, if the room's not small, I swear I'm going to kill you. It better be small. So then he goes, when I come to Mayapur, he said, I will come see. I said, okay, Prabhupada. So then I paid my obeisances and I left. And then the next morning, because I'm also a mercy seeker, as we all are, I still had time to go into Prabhupada's room. I knew he was getting ready to go on his walk. So I went into his room just kind of scanning like with one of those metal detectors. Just where could I find? And so I went into his bedroom and he had taken that Night Queen to bed with him and they were all crushed on his pillow. So he slept with the Night Queen. So I scooped up the Night Queen. And wherever Prabhupada was and wherever I am, it's tropical. When there's Night Queen in bloom, I take it and offer it to Prabhupada or make a vase of Night Queen. He loved it. So then to jump to Mayapur, there was a policy, and I don't know if it still is the policy, but women were not allowed to go on the morning walks. And if you haven't noticed by now, I have quite of a bold nature. And so I remember the ladies, Vrindavan, Biharini, Krishna Rupa, and Madhuri, they were all on the balcony of the main building. And I told the ladies, I'm going on the walk. They said, no, you're not. I said, Prabhupada was going to view it was the first time the long building, he was viewing that. That was the first building that year that was up, so he wanted to go see it. So I said, well, I'm going to go get my camera, and if they ask, I'll just say I'm taking pictures for BTG. And I figured if they came out, I'll send them to BTG. So that was my way. And they were like, Shridupa, you can't. And so at any rate, I was already prepped that this was not the cool thing to do, but that didn't stop me. So there I go with my camera. I trotted across. There was the whole guard, you know, they were all there. You could see all the dundas, and they were all in. And I got in, and the first person that saw me was Bhavananda Maharaj. And I'm telling you, you thought that, I mean, the wall, it was like I hit a wall. And he looked at me, and as he looked at me, Guru Kripa Maharaj was there, and all of a sudden he bumped into me, and I knew I was done. I was done. And at that point, I was literally shaking, and somehow or other Prabhupada got a glimpse of me. And from here to where Vishaka is there sitting, Prabhupada started to talk to me. He asked me a question I couldn't hear, and they opened up. It was like the Red Sea just parted. And there was Prabhupada, and here was me. And he started asking me about the house. And then, you know, it was just, honestly, I was so nervous, I could hardly hear anything he was saying. I was shaking because I knew I was like the unwanted child here. So they closed, and I kind of got the looks, okay, now what to do with her. And Prabhupada took about 3 steps, and he turned again to say something else to me, and they parted. And this time I had to come up to him because I couldn't hear, and I came all the way up to him. And he said, so? He said, I hear you're building one very nice house at the Goshala. And I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he said, you know, one CL Bajuria? And I was so glazed over because I was still literally shaking because to feel so unwanted was a bit intense. And I was staring at him with this vacuous look, and he was looking at me, and he could tell I wasn't getting it. He said, you know, one CL Bajuria? And I kind of went, no. And he said, you don't know one CL Bajuria? Because I took Srila Prabhupada. I was living with CL Bajuria, and I brought Prabhupada there as my guest. And Prabhupada preached, and we had a whole program there, and he goes, you do not know one Ciel Bajuria? I said, oh, yes, Srila Prabhupada. So he says, and he started joking now, and he said, you know, I went to his house. He said, I stayed 1 minute. Of course, he was exaggerating. He said, I stayed 1 minute, and he gave me 5,000 rupees. And I immediately said, so Prabhupada, you come, you stayed 2 minutes, I'll give you 10,000 rupees. Prabhupada started laughing. He said, so you arrange, I will come. So, by then, I thought, I can't do this anymore. So I turned around, took my camera, and I left the walk at that point. But it wasn't without chastisement. I think the next morning, the women were living above where they cooked. And I heard Bhavananda Maharaj at that time really chastising somebody. And so I thought this was going to be some kind of show. I wanted to see this. So I picked my head over the balcony to see who he was yelling at. And then he goes, and you and your damn camera. And I went, I'm taking pictures for BTG. And he says, who cares about your pictures? So, at any rate, that's kind of the Ras. It was brother and sister. It wasn't anything, I didn't take offense. I laughed. And, about 2 months later, he was riding with me in the car. I had my own driver. I was going to Calcutta. And so I was sitting in the front, and he and Jaivataka Maharaj were in the back. And he said, he used to call me Shruti Rupi instead of Shruti Rupa. So he goes, hey, Shruti Rupi, how'd your pictures come out? He couldn't see my face, but my shoulders went to my ears, and I was like, I haven't developed them yet. Any rate, so that was that. And as the story goes, Prabhupada got sicker and sicker. And I had no money, to tell you the truth. So I had some diamond earrings. I sent them to Calcutta with Abhirama to sell. So one day when Abhirama was still temple president of Calcutta, and so he came in to Prabhupada's room and to report that evening. And Prabhupada said, so, what is the news? He said, well, Srila Prabhupada, my wife has sold her diamond earrings to give you Guru Dakshin. He said, yes, she must give. And he said, then she's the daughter of a rich man, she must give. So, and then he said, pick an auspicious day, have Pradumna give you an auspicious day to move in. He said, you clean with cow dung, you have a fire sacrifice, you feed the devotees, invite the devotees, and I will come. So that day we actually brought Prabhupada's Vyasan out to the Goshala, and they pullied it up all the way. I was on the top floor, so they pulled it all the way up, brought it in. Pishima, Prabhupada's sister, helped me. We cleaned the whole place with cow dung. She and I cooked a huge feast. And we were all having kirtan, waiting for Prabhupada to come. And Prabhupada hadn't gotten out of bed that day, and he was in his bed. And Avrama came with a car to pick him up. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was trying to convince Prabhupada not to go, that it wouldn't be good for him. So at any rate, when Avrama walked in and saw Prabhupada, he was just starting to get dressed. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj filled him in, and he said he's afraid, Shri Rupa is going to be offended, the devotees are expecting. And so Abhiram said, Prabhupada, we don't want you to come. He said, but she is expecting. And he said, no, she'll understand. And so they convinced, he said, is okay. And so he didn't end up coming. But the thought was there, obviously, and it was very, very sweet, just to give you an idea of his kindness. And another story, I do love Mayapur. Just a side note, my daughter asked, I was with her and Aviram maybe a month ago, and just in conversation, she asked me, where do you want your ashes when you die? And I said, Mayapur. And then she said to Aviram, where do you want your ashes? And he said, Vrindavan. She says, I'm glad we had this conversation. So I do. I feel like I left my heart in Mayapur. I think they have a bumper sticker now that says that. I don't know, but it's very true for me. So seeing Narashwara actually brings back a lot of those memories. And a lot of time, Pishima was there, Prabhupada's sister. And one time in his room, Actually, another story, I'm not picking on Bhavananda, but he was very prominent then. And the lady, she was living in the main building, and they'd moved me into that building so I could be there on call for Prabhupada at any time. And the ladies' bathroom was broken, so she was using the men's bathroom. And I'd go in there with helper and things, but Bhavananda was, I don't know to say Bhavananda Maharaj or Bhavananda, I don't know. I have no clue. But at any rate, she'd be in there in her gumsha stuff. So he was complaining to Prabhupada, she's in there and she's bathing, and Prabhupada just looked at him. He said, she is old woman. Why are you bothering? So the mood went on about Bhishma. They were complaining quite a bit that Bhishma took too much time, took too much care, that she should be back with her family where they could take care of her properly. Of course, I had a soft spot, and I was there to support her in any way. And so one day during lunch, Prabhupada just looked, and just in conversation, he said, I am sannyasi. He said, but he said, I will always be thinking, is she okay? Has she fallen down? Is she eaten? Who's taken care? He said, there's natural affection between brother and sister. He said, so maybe she should go back to her son, so then I know that she is taken care of. I don't have to worry. And then another time, he said to me during lunch in Mayapur, Bhishma Bengali, and so they were brought up with mustard oil. Prabhupada said, if you want to eat for taste, you eat with mustard oil. If you want to eat for health, you eat with ghee. So she wasn't using mustard oil, but she took every chance to grind mustard seeds to a paste, to bring out that flavor. So every day we would sit and grind for about an hour and a half, everything, because Prabhupada had everything ground during that stage, because he said everything else was contaminated. So we would grind everything fresh, turmeric root, coriander, everything. So she would be grinding this mustard paste every day, and post a paste, and she'd put in, and Prabhupada began to swell his hands and feet. So one day he said to me, do not let her back in the kitchen. I was like, oh God. And she loved Prabhupada, adored Prabhupada, and he said, do not let her back in the kitchen. He said, she's trying to kill me. And, you know, today if anybody hears that, they think, oh, there's another conspiracy. But this is the way he spoke. And so I was thinking, oh Lord, how am I going to tell her not to come in the kitchen? So the next morning, she comes there in the kitchen, she sits down with a little foot knife. She did everything with a foot knife. She's smiling, like, you know, wanting instructions of what we're doing today. And I just take a breath. And she had these cow eyes, and she was loving and sweet, and just would look at you, then worship Prabhupada. She would sit in there, and he would actually talk about her and make fun of her. He would say, you know, in a room when she was eating with him once, actually it was with Jamuna in Calcutta, she he said, I have a guest coming today. It ended up being Bhishma. I'm just going to go to the end of the story. At the end, she's sitting there, no English. She's telling Jamuna, don't give her any more. He said, she's just like a cow. If you let her, she'll just eat. He said, she says this is water. And he was flipping the skin. He said, this is fat. So she's just sitting there smiling, laughing, you know, not knowing what's going on. So at any rate, she's sitting there, got her stone, and I'm like, Bhishma, Prabhupada bolo sarson nay. And she looked at me. I said, nay. And she looked at me like, you've got to be joking me. So I had such a soft spot for her, so I reached into the little spice tin. I literally took one seed. One seed. And if you've ever seen a silbata, it's pitted, and you grind it. And so that seed would have fallen in a pit. So I took the one seed, and I went, Bhishma, bas. She just looked. She literally took water and threw on that one seed, and she ground, and we both cracked up laughing. So that was all I gave her that day, but then we cooked, but I couldn't throw her out of the kitchen. So then that day when I take up Prabhupada's lunch, he says to me, so you told her? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. No. I didn't tell him what I told her, but yes, Prabhupada. And so then he just nodded his head. And then after that, he said to me, so to give you a prelude, so after he would eat, I would bring the plate down and I would transfer it, and then the devotees were waiting on all 3 floors because they knew Prabhupada's remnants were coming out. So for half an hour, they were out there chatting and gathering. And I literally hated this service because it would take me over an hour just to make this round. I'd take the plate, and everybody would pick, no, this, and I'm like, didn't say a word to Prabhupada, but I truly was so annoyed. So then one day I came in, and Prabhupada looked at me and he said, when he was there picking and pinning and putting the katoris back on, he says, I want you to mix everything. He said, you mix and then you distribute. And I was like, okay. I went downstairs. It was like I was kneading bread. I took the shukta, I took the dal, I took the sea rice. I was just rolling it. I mean, it was like dough. I went around, everybody was in shock. It took 1 day, 2 days. The 3rd day went up, not one person in the hall. Not one. Nobody wanted it. So from then on out, and I would do it faithfully because I was supposed to do it. Every day I did, just zoom. I'd go down, I'd eat the whole plate. I'd eat the whole plate every day, and it was absolutely nectar. There was no, I mean, there was the bitter, the Kerala in there was the posta, there was sweet, there was kheer, anything. The only thing I did leave out were the chilies, and the Bengalis would eat them. Because Prabhupada would take 2 or 3 green chilies on his plate, dip them in salt, and eat them. So I did not mix those in. I left those. But, so then one day, Prabhupada says to me, he's picking his teeth, and he's watching, and he said, so, you were mixing? And I said, Prabhupada, this is a very good system. And he just was like, I didn't say anymore, but I said, this is a very good system. and then I find out now, I think Dina Tarne told me maybe a year or 2 ago, I was telling her the story, and she said Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj used to ask his servant who was cooking for him, who took what? Who wanted what off of his plate? Who wanted the fried, who wanted the sweet, who wanted the sabji, and who wanted the chewed, the things that were chewed and spit out. And then he also had that system of mixing, so that was like that. What was another story there? There's one that Shruti Kirti wants me to say, but I just can't. And I moved to Calcutta. I'm just going to tell one more. It's quick. When Prabhupada meant 1 o'clock, it was 1 o'clock. If it was 12:30, it was 12:30. So I promise you, it couldn't have been more than 3 minutes after 1. And if you've been to the Calcutta temple, and I haven't been in years, but it has these very large doors on the veranda. And I had the plate, and when I opened the door, Prabhupada was sitting there and he was staring at the door. And as soon as the door opened, he looked at me and he said, "You are 3 days late." He said, "Don't you know when appetite comes, if you do not eat, disease will follow?" I mean, I literally was 3 minutes after 1. So the principles that I learned in the kitchen from Prabhupada was quality, purity, do not waste, punctuality, cleanliness. These things were important in every part of doing service for him. And they're things that we can carry into all stages of our service. And it's taught me many, many things, just those simple principles of not wasting, being on time, being clean, seeking out quality and everything. I mean, we would go from village to village or county to county, and here in America, we would go from state to state, order, you know. That was very, very important to Prabhupada. So I think Shruti Kirti's here. I'm not quite sure. He's looking at me. So I'll leave it here, and Arundhati, you can give something you want to close with. He's telling. What time is it? 6 o'clock. Okay, well, thank you very much. It was Hare Krishna.
You see this, everyone may be familiar, the bust of Srila Prabhupada. It says His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and author of over 70 books, and the greatest exponent of Krishna consciousness in the world. So, our godbrother Mahashringa Prabhu has gifted these two ladies today. So, Mahashringa, where are you around somewhere? This is for Mahashringa Prabhu for your...
Gifts all day.
She said you can give gifts all day. She'll be a... So thank you all very, very much for your personal accounts. You can give one to each of the ladies. Dinabandhu Prabhu will tell you about the program tomorrow because it'll be a little different.
Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Sri Krishna Balaram Mandir 40th Anniversary Mahotsav ki. So, when we were planning out, I was thinking that many people have never seen the place where Prabhupada stayed before Radha. Everybody's seen Radha Damodar, but not everybody's seen Radha Vamsi Gopal. Very sweet temple with lots of flowery, lot of potted plants. It has a very sweet atmosphere. So we thought we would go on Prikama tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll have class at 6:15 in the morning, 6:15 to 7:15. Then regular program. Then as soon as we finish the Guru Puja Kirtan, then we'll go out the gate. We've arranged actually for as many Prabhupada disciples as we can get. There's a bus. Otherwise there'll be rickshaws. We'll go way down the Prikama Marg as close as we can get to Radha Vamsi Gopal. Then we'll take a Kirtan procession, go there and visit Radha Vamsi Gopal, see the rooms where Prabhupada stayed, hopefully. And then we'll go to Radha Gokulanand that Prabhupada used to visit. And there's a big hall where we'll be able to take breakfast prasadam. Then from there we'll go to, if we're not too far behind schedule and Radharaman is open, because we know Prabhupada had a good, very dear relationship with Radharaman temple. We'll take darshan and then we'll go to Prabhupada's rooms in Radha Damodar. Then, if you want to, by then it'll be nice and hot. If you don't think you can go in procession, you can go back to the Prikama Marg and we'll have a transportation for you back to the temple. The rest of us will go into procession to Gita Devi Saraf's house, who donated this land to us. And we'll bring those deities, as we heard the other day from Gopal Krishna Maharaj, those deities, the two pieces of paper, yes and no, ha and nay. And Shirodakshay Vishnu picked ha. So those deities gave this land. So we'll take those deities on procession. She'll also have nice Mahaprasad there for all the devotees who go on the procession. Then we'll come in procession back here to Krishna Balaram temple. And for the rest of the day till evening time, those deities will remain on the altar with Radha Sham Sundar. So we can take darshan of the deities that donated the land for Krishna Balaram Mandir. So that's there won't be any morning session here because we'll all be on Prikama. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki. So now we have in about a half hour, there's a very wonderful program planned out for tonight for the cultural programs. Again, we'll have the Manipuri dance. This time they can do 8 different numbers. Last night they did 6. Today is 8. And we'll have our Pari Vida Prabhu, our dear God brother Pari Vida Prabhu, doing his Krishna Cabaret again. And I'm not sure what else. I have to see the schedule. But it's very action-packed show tonight for the cultural program. So you have a little time to go freshen up and come back by 6:30. They say they're going to put on a lecture for till 6 to 6:30. So, Hare.
Haribo
Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. So welcome everyone to this afternoon's session of Memories of Srila Prabhupada and the opening of Vrindavan Temple and service in Sri Vrindavan Dham. So today we have three of Srila Prabhupada's, as he would often call them, his daughters. Many times when Prabhupada would write a letter, he would start, "My dear daughter." So these are Srila Prabhupada's disciples and daughters. And just here we have, and I know them all through the years off and on, Arundhati Mataji. She met Prabhupada in 1966. Is that what you said? Yes. And joined in Boston Temple 1968. And New York in 1968, I'm sorry. And we had a lot of time together serving Srila Prabhupada personally. She was cooking for him. Even while she had her little son, she was there cooking for Srila Prabhupada. And she also did transcription work from Srila Prabhupada's dictation at nighttime. And I, in fact, remember in 1973, when Srila Prabhupada delivered his Vyas Puja address at Bhaktivedanta Manor, the devotees, of course, were sitting and glorifying Srila Prabhupada, and then he gave a lecture, and in the lecture, Prabhupada mentioned her husband at the time, Prajumna Prabhu, and said how Prajumna had actually done Chaitanya Charitamrita. And then he said, and Arundhati, she has done all of the typing. So the devotees were glorifying their spiritual master, and Srila Prabhupada turned right around and began to glorify his disciples. So Prabhupada also mentioned her in that lecture, so I remember. And then, of course, I remember here in Vrindavan and so many places in India. I was very fortunate because of Shruti Rupa Mataji and Arundhati and Malati and Palika and Jamuna, because they all cooked for Srila Prabhupada when he was in India. I cooked for Prabhupada when I traveled with him everywhere in the world, but in India, I'd never cooked for him. And I have to say that was very kind of him, because cooking in India at that time was certainly had its difficulties or challenges. Thank you very much. Had many, many challenges. I remember one time, I don't even know what temple it was, but I remember the pressure cooker blowing up on Malati in this small little kitchen, and there was dal all over the ceiling. But anyway, Shruti Rupa, she joined in Paris in 1973. And she was a very young girl at that time, and because she had a very auspicious birth and some Lakshmi was available, and the devotees knew it, and they were going to have the installation very soon in Paris, and where Prabhupada traveled from Bhaktivedanta Manor and stayed 1 week in Paris. I was also there at that time. So she went to London, when you said with Balagopal, and there they did shopping for the deities in London. I can't imagine you had to go to London when you were in Paris, but somehow or other.
Prabhupada was in London.
And Srila Prabhupada was in London. And she walked into the temple. I'll let you tell that story. No. That's your story. And on the end is Vishalini. 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 Did I get it? 3 times the charm. And she also joined 1972 in San Francisco and spent many years here in Vrindavan and had children here and lived here. And of course, now she is with her husband, Gunarnava Prabhu, who we all heard from this morning in class, and together they're a very wonderful team in Krishna consciousness. And I'm very eager to hear from all of you, so please speak for us about Srila Prabhupada and your memories wherever about Prabhupada and here in Vrindavan Dham. So thank you very much. So I think Shruti Rupa, you'll begin?
I was going to see who wants to begin. Where to begin? Vishalini? You want me to begin? Randiti, you want me to begin? Go ahead. Okay. I think you should begin, Randiti. Why? Okay. First, let me say that we are three ladies here that are not used to public speaking. So we ask you for your kindness, your patience, and we're going to try to. But most of our stories are very personal, so that's the other impediment to speaking in public, because there weren't philosophical instructions. It was kitchen or showed Prabhupada's kindness and his mercy. I truly had no qualification at all to even be cooking, but I had immense desire and I fell in love with Srila Prabhupada. That was sum total, and he reciprocated with that. When I first actually went to the temple when I was 15, and the first thing, when I sat down, the temple president sat next to me. And he asked me what I liked of the feast, and I pointed out something that I liked, and it was actually chudi noodles, and he told me that Srila Prabhupada had taught him how to make them. So that right there was my very first. And then when 3 years later I joined in Paris when I became of age, at 18, I was then given the fortune, I saw Srila Prabhupada for the first time within the first month of me being a devotee. And when I walked, it was at the manor. And when I walked into the temple room, Prabhupada was singing Jaya Radha Madhava. And before I even sat down, the tears were coming down my face hearing him sing. And I knew this was where I was supposed to be. And when we returned to Paris, and Prabhupada came shortly afterwards, the temple president then at that time was very kind to me, and he allowed me to make Prabhupada's afternoon fruit juice offering. So straight away I was entering into this mood of the kitchen. And after 6 months or so, I went back to Florida, where I'm from, and met the devotees there, and then moved into the temple there. And I think within months, it was actually Shruta Kirti, and then Prabhupada came to Miami, and I was allowed to do those same things. So this became a constant prayer for me that, even in my chanting, I would only focus on wanting to serve Prabhupada personally. So then the next year, then I went to Mayapur Festival in '74. I tried to get into the kitchen, but Nandarani wouldn't let me in. And then the next year I came to Vrindavan in '75. I came here for the 4 months of Chachur Mas. And Prabhupada was here, and Davi Shakti Prabhu, I went to her immediately, and she took pity on me, I suppose, and she started giving me service. I started cleaning Prabhupada's rooms, taking care of Tulsi. He had a garden. Then I started making his breakfast. Then I started making his evening. And so in this way it began to increase and increase. And so then I became more involved, and my husband Abhiram became temple president of Calcutta. And so now I was in India, 75, 76, 77. And I was cooking for Prabhupada, traveling, and I also was cooking with Palika. When Palika was his cook, I would travel with her, and that's where Rundati and I met. She would usually be doing the typing for Prabhupada and traveling because her husband Pradumna, and then Palika and I. So just to give a full circle of that, so for those 75, 76, 77, and then in '77, Abhiram became Prabhupada's personal secretary. Tamal Krishna Maharaj wanted him as his assistant. and I was living in Mayapur, and Prabhupada asked for me to join them. And at that time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj didn't want any more women on the party, and kind of insisted to Srila Prabhupada, no, that means increasing your entourage, women, children. And Prabhupada, I've never said this story in public, but I think maybe because of the times that are taking place, I'm going to say it for whatever it's worth. But Prabhupada said, no, she should come. He said, I like her very much, and she's very expert. He said, we can use her help. She's a very expert manager. There you have it. I've never said that. So that at any rate, Aviram was going to come and fetch me, and then Goswami Maharaj said, no, you stay here. She can come by herself. She's expert. And Aviram said, I didn't say that. Prabhupada said that. So at any rate, he did come, and I came, and I sat. And 1 day went by, 2 days went by, 3 days went by, and I was expecting to jump into the kitchen. Nothing happened. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj daily would say to Srila Prabhupada, Shruti Rupa's here. She should. And then Prabhupada didn't say anything one day. Next day, Srila Prabhupada, Shruti Rupa's here. Didn't say anything. The third day, he said, Srila Prabhupada, Shruti Rupa's here. She should cook. And Prabhupada, at this time, said, you are sannyasi. Why you keep asking for this woman? He said, I have no appetite. She can do so many things. And then Goswami Maharaj said, but Prabhupada, we thought that she would cook for you with devotion, and then you would get an appetite and eat. And he said, impossible. He said, I have no appetite. So this was like May, June of 77. So I'm jumping ahead. And then I'll go back just to kind of give you the overview. So when I heard that, I went actually into deep depression, because this was my whole focus, was only to be near Prabhupada and to cook for him and serve him. As a woman, you couldn't get in any other way, generally. So when I said I went in deep depression, I did, and I was living in the guest house here, and I mean, just heartbreaking tears, just breaking down. I couldn't function, I couldn't move, and Aviram's service was disrupted, then Tamal Krishna Maharaj's service was disrupted because and they were going back and forth what to do with me. And he thought I should Tamal Krishna suggested I go to Gita Nagari and worship Radha Damodar, and they came up with a suggestion. I said no. Then they came up with another suggestion. We'll ask Prabhupada if she can get a deity and go to Jaipur, and she can begin worshiping Prabhupada with a deity. And I was fighting that one, and so I can remember went on for 4 or 5 hours, and at one point Abraham came up to the room and said, I feel so sorry for you, what can I do? And at that point I couldn't even talk, and I just looked at him, and in my mind I truly said these words in my mind, but I wouldn't say it because I thought he'd think I was a sahaja. But when he said, what can I do for you? In my head I just thought, end my life. Just end my life. So it was like that. The intensity to be near Prabhupada was my, that OCD obsession. And then I shifted. When I said that out, in my mind, I shifted and I began to pray to Radharani. And I took shelter and began praying that I'm here in your home. Please allow me to serve your servant. And I just began praying to her. And then all of a sudden there was a knock on the door. And it was a brahmachari, and he said, Tamal Krishna Maharaj wanted to see me, and I just said, no. I've heard all I want to hear. No. And they said, you have to go. So I went down, and I literally looked like I'd been beat with a baseball bat. I'd been crying all day. So I had my sari all the way over my face. I mean, you can tell I'm a rather emotional person here. So I went downstairs thinking, I don't want to hear anything. And so I sat there with my head down, and he started speaking, and he said, Srila Prabhupada is calling for you, and he says he wants to test you. I didn't hear what he said. And then he started preaching to me about what Prabhupada wanted. And all of a sudden, I lifted up my sari and I said, "What did you say?" He said, "Prabhupada said he wants to test you, and he wants you to make Singara and Kachori, and he wants it in 45 minutes." So then he started preaching to me how this is the most important service, that Prabhupada hadn't eaten anything in weeks, and to get him to have an appetite and make, he just started preaching and preaching, and I just looked at him and I said, "Maharaj, I don't have time for this. I got to go." Because I knew the kachoris took over 30 minutes, so at any rate, I wanted to get to the kitchen. So went up to the Didi kitchen. I think Bhakti Charu was down in Prabhupada's kitchen, and Bibhu Chaitanya helped me make the coal buckets. So between the two of us, he worked with me and made them. When Prabhupada said, 45 minutes, it didn't mean 47. It didn't mean you had to be exactly on time. That was one of the kitchen principles that you learn very quickly in Prabhupada's service. So Bhakti Charu Maharaj came up and handed him the plate. He went down. 5 minutes later, he came back up, said, "Srila Prabhupada wants to know what's in them." So I told him, and then another 5 minutes later, he comes back up and he said, "Srila Prabhupada's calling for you." So when I went down, we hadn't seen Prabhupada in, I don't know how long it had been, because he was so weak, he wasn't actually coming into the temple at that time. So when I walked in, he actually didn't have a shirt on, and he had his knee up, and he had his hand on his knee, and his shoulder was jutting out. It was just bone. And his voice was very weak to where I had to move up maybe 18 inches from him just to hear his voice. And he looked at, so when I came in, he had the Singara. Singara is a Bengali samosa. It's shaped like a log. So he had this in his hand, and he said, "I have not eaten anything solid for 2 weeks." And at that point, because I was so close to his face, tears started to come down my face. And he saw that, and he said, "But I'm eating your Singara." And then everybody just cheered. And it was like, "Jai Prabhupada." Because they knew if he would eat something, that meant he would stay with us. He would be here a little longer. And that was the whole mood at that time. And so then he looked at me and he said, "So you can cook." And I looked at him and I said, "Srila Prabhupada, thank you." I said, "I was praying to Radharani." And he said, "Yes, I know." Just like that. And so then he looked at me and he said, in a more stern voice, he said, he said, "You must shop, you must cook, and you must clean, and you must have no assistance." And then he got very soft and he said, "Is that all right?" I said, "Of course, Srila Prabhupada." Then he looked at the men. There was Upendra, there was Abhiram, there was Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and Bhakti Charu Swami in the room. And he said, "And no men are to be in the kitchen when she is there." He says that if you need help, your husband can do. So that was the beginning of that. And it became almost like a game because he truly had no appetite. He truly was reciprocating with my prayer. He had no appetite at all. So every day it became a challenge, what to make, what was healthy, what would be, and it was the middle of summer too. So now it's like June, July, it was hot. And then he started telling me to make, certain things, and it almost became like just a game. He said one day to make dahi vada and idli, and he would take the spoon before he would touch anything, and he'd take the back of the spoon and touch it, and if it had that spring, he would take a bite. And then he touched the idli, and it didn't have that soft spring, and he looked at me and he said, "Soft means soft as cotton, hard means hard as a rock. It should be soft as cotton." So he didn't even touch it. So it was in that way every day like that. And then, but I stayed on, and then it was decided we were going to go to England. So I'm just finishing up right there. So officially, I was the very last official cook because I flew them to London And then when he decided, I do have parts of my journal here, the things he was saying in London when he wanted to go back to Bombay to see the opening. It was quite telling. And so then when he decided to go back, Tamal Krishna Maharaj told me to fly on to Gita Nagari and prepare, because Prabhupada was only going to go for the opening and then come on to Gita Nagari, and the plan was we were going to go on to LA and then Hawaii. So everyone knows that story. He didn't come, and then when he decided, that he wasn't, then I didn't return. So then where am I now? So that's kind of the full circle of 75, 76, 77, and then there's individual. And I spent time with Arundhati Prabhu here. We traveled together. We were Kumbh Mela, we were in Bombay, we were in Mayapur, Bhubaneswar, different times with Prabhupada, and there's a lot of little stories within between there, but I feel like I need to let each one of them say something, and then maybe we can go back and forth. There is one story I'll tell first, which kind of moves into the more humor side of Prabhupada, or interesting than this heavy mood there. But the reason why I began with that was because I wanted you to know that all along within my whole Krishna consciousness, the thread that kept me going forward was prayer and the intensity to be in Srila Prabhupada's service. And I will tell you that it is reciprocated. The power of prayer, I could tell you story after story how Prabhupada knew, and I never said a word to him, and he reciprocated with what my desires were. But once I was cooking with Palika in Vrindavan, since we're here in Vrindavan, and we were serving together, and so when we'd bring in Prabhupada's plates, and then when we'd pick them up, I'd stand there and she'd hand them to me. And the way Prabhupada ate was, he'd have the full thali, and then we'd have katoris, his shukta, and the way things went around, it was a very intended way each vegetable was placed and where it was placed and how he would eat. Sometimes before the plate even hit the table, when you were bringing it down, and it was timed in such a way that 1 o'clock meant 1 o'clock, and as Prabhupada, one foot was on his seat, and his knee was just bending, and as he sat, the plate had just touched the table. And that's the way it was every day, every day, every day. And so, and then he would take the katoris off, empty them into the middle, the rice, and it was very Bengali style, the shukta, and he would eat like that. So as a result, there was always crumbs here and there, crumbs on his dhoti here and on the floor. And here in Vrindavan, there were always ants. By the time he'd finished eating, there would be ants all over the chonky. So this one day, Lika was picking up, putting, and handing to me, and Prabhupada would sit as we would come in, and he would usually pick his teeth, and he'd be watching everything you did. He saw every single thing. Sometimes with me, he would point even to what I'd missed to keep wiping. So this day, he's there picking, and he's watching, and she's got her cloth, and she's just wiping the ants away. She's just wiping, and he's looking, and he looks at her, and he goes, says, if you simply do this, he said, they will go. He said, it is best to kill as little as possible. So I'm standing there, and I'm like, check, I got that. That's filed. I know that now, So months later, I'm down in Varda. Palika didn't go. We went down to a Bhagavad Gita conference. This was in 76. We went to a Bhagavad Gita conference, and we visited Mr. Bajaj Fans Blenders. He was our host. And we also saw this Baba, Vinod Baba. He was on a word fast till they banned cow slaughter in his state. So it was very odd. Went to see him, and he wasn't talking, and Prabhupada was speaking, and that was rather interesting. And we visited Gandhi's ashram, and they gave us a tour. We met Gandhi's niece, and it was a very nice time down there. But at any rate, so I'm cooking, and I'm kneeling down at his, and he's sitting there with his toothpick, he's watching, and I'm telling you, there's crumbs, chapati crumbs everywhere. There's chapati crumbs, all over, and I'm in a dilemma what to do. I can see them all under the table, all over his dhoti. So I'm actually taking it and flicking it, and they're jumping up where I can get them. And I'm putting the katoris back on. He's just sitting there watching. He's pointing for me to where to clean. And all of a sudden, I notice ants are everywhere. So I'm thinking, I got this. So I start. Prabhupada looks at me and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "Prabhupada, I'm making the ants go." He looks at me and he said, "Simply wipe them away." So I just looked at him, just looked down and just started wiping them. And afterwards I was thinking, it's my pride. My pride got me. I thought I had this. And he showed me, so that was a lesson in that. I thought that was rather humorous. So I'll continue again if you want to hear. Actually, if you don't mind, I want to tell one more because it's really funny. Then it was here in Vrindavan, and then Arundhati or Vishalani can speak. Jamuna had come in '76 to get Prabhupada's blessings for the cookbook, and Palika and I were cooking, and so Jamuna spent a few days with Prabhupada in his garden, and she was speaking about the cookbook, and they were going over things, and he was very pleased and giving her direction. So it was decided that Palika and I would travel with Jamuna, and we went to Calcutta, and we were going to research with Pishima, Prabhupada's sister, and we stayed at One Life Members House, CL Bajuria. And we stayed there and did the research, and then when Jamuna finished, she left, and Palika and I came back. And Arundhati was cooking for Prabhupada during that time. So we came back, there was one sabji, do you remember it? Batti Chachari. So Arundhati had told us how to do it, and somehow or other we weren't getting it. So Prabhupada every day was saying something that wasn't right. So then he said, tomorrow I'll come in and show you how to make it. So it was all planned. He was coming in after his massage. So the door opened right at that time. I had everything cut, ready for him, and we had the 2 burners going there and all the spices set up, the pot. He got to the front door. He was in his gumption, glistening from the massage. He was oiled. He hadn't gone to bath yet. He came to the door and he looked in and he smiled and he said, in a very innocent voice, he said, "I've never been in my kitchen before. It is very nice." So then he came in, and the first thing he saw was I had thrown, the bottom of the cauliflower, there's that core. As not being brought up in India, what am I know what to do with it? So I had twisted it off and thrown it in the bucket. It's the first thing Prabhupada saw, and he said, "Why you've thrown this away?" I learned straight on, I never gave an answer to whatever my madness was. I looked, but I took note. So I immediately made another check. That was one of the kitchen principles, Prabhupada. There were certain principles in the kitchen that you learned, and not wasting, punctuality, purity, quality, cleanliness. These were all had to be met to be in Prabhupada's service. So at any rate, then he came around the kitchen, he sat, we had a little seat for him, we had the pot there, and Palika was holding the spices, I was holding the vegetables, and so it was Hari Sari, Prabhu, and Bhagaji. Bhagaji had come in. So we were all in the kitchen, and Prabhupada speaking to Bhagaji back and forth in Hindi, and the fire's going, and he put in the spices and handed the vegetables, and he's talking to Bhagaji, and a Bengali cook, they cook on very high flame. So the flame was quite high. So he's chatting with Bhagaji, and Palika's thinking, this is going to burn. She turns the flame down a little bit, and Prabhupada's talking, and Prabhupada comes back. He turns the flame up, starts doing something, starts talking. Palika turns it down again. It's happened 3 times. 3rd time, Prabhupada goes, "Hari Baba, why are you messing?" And he turned it back up. And the whole trick to this preparation was that it burns. it burns on the bottom, and it starts. He described this sound. Do you know the sound? Remember the sound? It was this sound of sizzling, and there were Punjabi buddies. These very big, hot black buddies were in this. You don't stir it. There's a crust on the bottom, and at the end you do this. So then he looked at Bhagaji and he said, "So simple, still they cannot do." And then he turns to Bhagaji and he said, "I can make on these 2 burners prasad for 100 men in 45 minutes. Bhagaji said, "Khichdi." Prabhupada said, "No, full prasad." And Bhagaji said, "Impossible." And Prabhupada looked at him and said, "I'll bet you 1 lakh of rupees." And then Bhagaji started to laugh. He said, "Prabhupada, whatever I have, you'll take anyway." So that was that. And then Prabhupada got up and then went out. So we did sort out that vegetable. So who would like to say something?
Haribol. I think I'm going to start with how I got to Vrindavan rather than how I became a Krishna devotee. I'll say very briefly, I saw Srila Prabhupada in 1966. I saw him at, in Tompkins Square Park and joined in the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra with him. And walked away, didn't really give it another thought. And somehow that planted a seed. And by 1968, I had moved to the East Village, just a few blocks away from Matchless Gifts, the first temple. And I met some devotees, and I think that was meant to be because the seed was planted at just seeing Prabhupada, that I ended up moving right nearby the temple and meeting devotees and then being invited to New Vrindavan just when they had gotten the land. It wasn't New Vrindavan yet. I was just living down the street from Hayagriva and Umapati and Kirtanananda. So anyhow, I joined in 1968 in New York. I was with Brahmananda in the temple, and he was there for a while, and he said, "Why don't I go to Boston, because there's a Brahmacharini ashram there," which there wasn't in New York City. So I moved to Boston, and when I got there, there was just 4 Brahmacharinis, and there was Jadharani and Satsvarupa. And Satsvarupa asked me, "What do I know how to do?" And he was going through this list. "Do you know how to cook?" "No." "Do you know how to paint?" "No," because there were some artists there. And a whole list of things. And he said, "Do you know how to type?" I said, "Yes." And so I was immediately put to work on Prabhupada's books. And that was a great blessing that I got to do throughout the time that Srila Prabhupada was here on the planet in different capacities, either just typing edited versions or typing on the first composer machine that we had, and eventually transcribing his tapes. So Pradyumna and I, we were actually supposed to go to Vrindavan in 1971, and we were on our way to Vrindavan with a whole group that was going at that time. And we got as far as Berry Place, and somehow things didn't work out. So things weren't working out so well with me and him. And I ended up going back to the States, and he ended up going to India. Prabhupada wrote a letter to me. This was in 1972, and he said, "Your husband is with me now, and he will remain with me always to help me with the Sanskrit on my books. So it was kind of a shock when I got that letter. Eventually it turned into a blessing. And so whenever Prabhupada, since Pradyumna was, from that point on, he was traveling with Prabhupada. And so whenever they would come to the States, I would always go wherever they are. So I would see both Prabhupada and Pradyumna. And so eventually, in 1974, Srila Prabhupada came to New Dwarka, Los Angeles. And I was not doing very well at the time. And Prabhupada asked Pradyumna, "How is your wife?" And he said, "She's not doing so well, Prabhupada. She's smoking." So I had fallen down a bit. I was smoking cigarettes. And he said, "Tell her if she stops smoking, she may come to Vrindavan." And then he asked, "What does she like to do?" And Pradyumna said, "Well, she sings a lot. She likes to lead kirtan." He said, "Tell her if she stops smoking, she may come to Vrindavan and sing all day in front of the deities." Haribol. So I feel like today, was such a special occasion for me and for the women especially, because women have not been allowed to chant in the temple for the last 30 years. But they were allowed to chant in the temple previous to that time. And they were a part of the 24-hour kirtan when it began. Was it in 1975 that Dhananjaya, 76? Okay, it started in 76, and there wasn't a lot of us in Vrindavan. And so anyhow, we had a women's group in the afternoon, and I pretty much led the women's group with Sitala. Sitala was the drummer, and I was led and played the harmonium, and different devotees would come and lead as well. And Balagopal was also a big part of the kirtan. Do you remember what time you sang, Balagopal? I can't hear. Hi?
3 and 4, 4 and 5.
Okay, right. So, I think that's important for everybody to know, because a lot of devotees, especially the ones that aren't Prabhupada disciples, and maybe a lot of the Prabhupada disciples know it, but the ones that aren't don't know that women were chanting in the temple here in Vrindavan, and Prabhupada was here, and it was okay. It was fine. So we had a kirtan today, and I think the women were very happy to chant in the temple after all this time. It was history in the making after all these years that we could do that. And hopefully it will happen some more by Srila Prabhupada's mercy and desire. And so far as desire goes, I heard Brahmananda talking a lot about desire yesterday, and about Srila Prabhupada's desire, and that he was able to do everything that he did because he had this very, very strong desire to do it, and strong intention. And Sri Rupa was also just talking about desire, and I have some stories of where I had some very intense desire to serve Srila Prabhupada in a certain way, and it manifested. The first one in 1976, I went to see Srila Prabhupada in Mayapur. I had been, at this point, I had been living in Vrindavan since 74 with a few little breaks here and there. And so 76, during the Gaur Purnima festival, I went to Mayapur. And I went up to Darshan in Srila Prabhupada's room, and I handed him a poem that I had written for him. And it was in the form of I'm not sure, I think it might be called an acrostic, but I'm not sure. But it said something down the left-hand side of the page. And then it was a poem starting with the letter of each word that it said. So it said, "All glories to Srila Prabhupada," down the left-hand side of the page. And then there was a poem. And he read it, and he appreciated it. And at that time, I said to him, "Srila Prabhupada, I wish that I could be with you always. I wish that I could go with you wherever you go and serve you." And he didn't actually say anything, but he acknowledged the sentiment. And then after that, we ended up in Los Angeles. I went back to Los Angeles to see my son, who was in the Gurukula, and Prabhupada also went to Los Angeles. At that time, I complained about the Gurukula. I thought my son should have learned how to read by then. He had been in the Gurukula 2 years. So I complained to Pradyumna, and Pradyumna told Prabhupada, you know, Arundhati says Aniruddha hasn't learned how to read. So Prabhupada said, well, tell her she can take him out of the Gurukula and teach him herself. So that's what I did. I took him out, and I got a book called Let's Read, and I started teaching him. And then shortly after that, we all went to New York for the New York Ratha Yatra. Srila Prabhupada went there, and I went there with my son. And at that time, my very strong desire manifest, because Radha Ballabha, who was one of the people in charge of ISKCON Press, he came up to me one day and he said, Srila Prabhupada is inviting you onto his entourage. He wants to do a lot of translation work, and he wants somebody to be there to immediately transcribe the tapes. So he's asking you to do that. And he said Aniruddha can come too. So he invited us both on to his party. And it was a party to be with Srila Prabhupada. It was very difficult in some ways, but it was very wonderful to be with him. So that was one very, very strong desire I had, and that was manifest. So I was mostly at that time transcribing wherever we went, and I was teaching Aniruddha how to read. And then we went to a few places on the East Coast, and then we went to London, and we went to Paris, New Mayapur, and we went to Tehran, and then we went to India. And then we were traveling all around India. So once we got to India, somebody had arranged for Palika to come to cook for Prabhupada, because there had been a lot of different people cooking for him. And I'm not sure what his secretary at the time or his personal servant arranged that Palika come and cook for him. And so she was traveling around with us, and at a certain point, this was my other strong desire, I thought, oh, how wonderful it would be to cook for Srila Prabhupada. It was just a thought, you know. I had learned how to cook at that point, because I didn't know how to cook anything when I joined. But, you know, I had done a fair amount of cooking at that point for deity cooking, and some cooking for devotees. So anyhow, I had this thought, and then within a few weeks, Palika got eczema on her hands. And Srila Prabhupada decided that he didn't want her to cook for him while she had eczema, which she used to get once in a while. So he said, train Arundhati up to cook for me. So I got my desire fulfilled at that time. So I cooked for some time then and had all kinds of wonderful experiences just serving Prabhupada and just the different things that he would say, you know, about the prasadam. And generally he was pleased. For the most part, he liked the prasadam. And in different ways, I got more time to cook for him because we got to Vrindavan, and as Shruti Rupa mentioned before, she and Palika and Jamuna wanted to go and learn cooking in South India. They wanted to go to Calcutta. So they asked Srila Prabhupada if they could go and learn cooking, and they said, Arundhati can cook for you. So I got to cook again. And then another time, Prabhupada was visiting a few places. The one place I remember is Aligarh, a few hours from Vrindavan, I think. And a few places not too far from Vrindavan. He decided he didn't want Palika to come with him then because she was a single woman. And he thought it wouldn't look good that he's traveling with a single woman at that point. Huh?
Widow and white.
Widow and white, okay. And, right. So again, he said Arundhati can do the cooking. So I'm just remembering this little thing that he said to me, little but great thing that he said to me when we got to Aligarh. This woman who was there in the house we were staying in, she made some preparation for him, which I don't remember what it is now, but I think I wrote it down somewhere, but I don't remember right now. And Prabhupada really liked it. And he said I should learn it from her. And he said, learn to cook like Srimati Radharani. She pleased Krishna by her cooking. And you can also please Krishna by cooking for him, just as Radharani did. So, anyhow, that was my, I have many cooking stories, but I think I'll pass the mic over at this time to Vishalini, and maybe we'll have another round after that.
Om Ajnatmindasya Ganagana Shalakaya Chaksur Militam Yenutasvai Shri Guravi Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitavan Vanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah. My story is a story of causeless mercy. There's mercy and there's causeless mercy. Causeless means it's a free ticket. You haven't earned it. Many of my god sisters and god brothers did. I've gone through devotional service much like sitting here right now, feeling unprepared and just relying on causeless mercy. So, if I might, I'll just jump in. I joined in San Francisco. Jayananda was there. And I was there for 6 months. Very brief, but that was an ocean of mercy, what we experienced. My first taste of Krishna consciousness. First time I met Prabhupada was in Los Angeles. And we sent him a case of mangoes. He called, gave a blanket. While we were in his room, he said, give me your beads. And the next day, he gave me first initiation. The next morning, I was doing some service, and someone said, Prabhupada called. He wants you to go up. And I ran up, and he gave me second initiation. Soon after, via London, I came to Vrindavan. And when I got here, there was just a flat piece of land with 4 arches. And at that time, in those beginning days, we had a lot of opportunity to see a very intimate side of Prabhupada. And I was a mercy grabber. Etiquette went out the window, and I would grab for whatever mercy I could get. So in those days, there was a lot of causeless mercy. Srila Prabhupada, as it was spoken about before, he was like a thunderbolt, pushing the building along. But there was also another side that I very much focused on, and that was the very sweet classes that he would give just with a small set of devotees there. And they had sweetness like nothing else, a causeless mercy. I can remember when there was the 3 huts, just the 3 huts, and Prabhupada was having a massage, and I had to walk by Prabhupada to get where I was going. And Prabhupada said, "So, what do you think?" And I said, "Srila Prabhupada, I love this place." And he said, "You love it, it's yours." So those kind of interchanges were very sweet. At the same time, Mayapur was about to have its first festival. So I went to Mayapur and helped prepare for that first festival. And it was getting close to the deadline, and we stayed, I think it was the night before, we stayed up all night working, and someone brought buckets of date ras. And I don't know if date ras, so date juice from date trees. And we just very happily downed it and downed it and downed it, and it kept us going all night long. And the next day, the day of the festival, we broke out in big red welts everywhere. I think it was the following Mayapur festival. I was in Mayapur and I got very sick. Went a few months before, and I was in Ramakrishna Hospital in Calcutta. I think it was Ramakrishna Hospital for 2 months. And it was Gaur Panim. I was missing everything. So decided to sign myself out of the hospital on Gaur Panim, which was holy. Not a good idea. A woman alone trying to get quite sick, trying to get to Mayapur. I think it took about 5 hours, and it was definitely not a pleasant journey. And as soon as I got there, I collapsed and missed the whole thing anyways. So then we all jumped on a train, and Denanoth was there. And we had these, I don't know if anyone here was on that train coming from Mayapur to Delhi, but there were raging kirtans up and down the train, and they would jump off at every stop and have these wild kirtans. Did anyone here experience that? I think it was 75. I think it was. So when I'll cross-reference it with Diva Shakti's wonderful book. When we got to Vrindavan, everyone was staying at Fogal Ashram, and by then I was seriously ill. And it was the type of days where, in those days, when you got ill, I would lay there for 2 hours thinking, I've got to turn over. And that's how sick you got. I could hear the kirtans going on. I could hear Prabhupada talking, but I simply couldn't get out of the room. When I finally had to get out of the room, I was in the outhouse with flies all over me, and I thought, perfect place. You know, Krishna has rightly put me, you know, and so I did miss that festival in that room, and Prabhupada was about to leave. He was the next day, and somehow or other I got on a rickshaw and I had to hold on to the bottom of the rickshaw and went into Prabhupada's room. It was filled with sannyasis, paid my obeisances, and a dialogue took place where Prabhupada wanted to know how I was, and it was answered back, oh, she's really sick, she's going to die, she's going to die. And as I was getting up from paying obeisances, and this causeless mercy, Prabhupada said, in the mood that Shruti Kirti said, how he would reciprocate with his disciples. He said, as I was getting up, he said, you are Radharani. And there was a buzz in the room. What did he say? You know, and he said, "You are Radharani. Radharani is maidservant of Radharani. You're a maidservant of Radharani. You are Radharani." He was in that playful mood. Soon after that, I got really well. But that's again causeless mercy. In those days, if I can, in those days, Jamuna was cooking for Prabhupada, and one time he came into the kitchen, swung around the door with big eyes, and he said, "And what are you cooking now?" So he would show a very different mood in Vrindavan. We got the opportunity to have those intimate moments. Okay. Bombay. I followed Prabhupada to Bombay one time. And I think I went before he came. And I was doing pujari work. And in those days, Radharasa Bihari was in a hut. Ambika might remember this. And I was dressing the deities with Jagat Purush, and we did some pretty weird and wonderful things. I'm surprised we're still here. We would go to the beach and get palm branches, put the deities under palm branches. Does anyone know the backdrops that used to be of the first Bhagavatam with all the planets on it? Do you remember that, Ambika? Yes, so that was the backdrop for the deities, and then we put these blinking lights. When the doors opened, it was like, you know, it seemed to get devotees there every day for opening of the deities, but I'm surprised. We used to do plays, and who was in the plays? It was a group of brahmacharis, Sridhar Brahmachari, Lokanath Brahmachari, who else? Jagat Purush, Bhagavat. So one was of Nrsimhadev, and there was a pillar built. And Bhagavat was hiding. No, Bhagavat was hiding in the pillar. He was Hiranyakasipu. Was he? Yeah, yeah. Was it Jagapuru? Pardon? Nishringadev. Yeah. He was Nishringadev, and Jagapurush was Hiranyakasipu. And after that play, Srila Prabhupada's eyes got real. He would laugh. He would laugh so hard, he would have to hold his stomach. He would be like, ha, 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 ha. And after that play, he said, I want to thank everyone. He said, especially Hiranyakasipu with big wide eyes. Pardon? Mr. Hiranyakasipu. There you go. And somehow or other, I blocked this out of my mind, this one, but a devotee reminded me of Govardhan Puj play. And in that play, I took the part of Krishna. And at the end of the play, causeless mercy. But I'll ask all of you to try to imagine, if you were in this position, what would you do with this? And Prabhupada, at the end, got down off of the Vyasasana, came over to Krishna, garlanded Krishna, and paid obeisances. What do you do with that? What do you do with that? That Prabhupada, you know, he saw Krishna in everything and everyone, and he reciprocated with his disciples. I would ask, who would be here today? Have you met anyone who gave you in life what Prabhupada gave you? Why are we all here now? He gave us a glimpse of the spiritual world, where we could taste it, where we could see it at every moment being around him. So that was some of the types of interactions we would get. That was causeless mercy. Vrindavan, if we talk about it, I won't duplicate what others have talked about, but maybe draw on a couple of funny stories. I tried to get Bala Gopal up here, and she just wouldn't do it. But she was reminding me of going to Loy Bazaar, and it was at holy time. And we're both on the rickshaw, and she was getting squirted with water. So she got a bit animated, but the part that we weren't clued in on was her sari had got caught in the spokes of the chain of the rickshaw, and she was choking. She was and the rickshaw thought that she was just being bothered about getting wet, but she was actually choking, the poor thing. And unfortunately, I wasn't much help to her. I was laughing so hard, unfortunately. Another time, and I'm taking gems from different stories that have been told previously. Vrindavan, we used to be able to walk on the silky, sparkly sands of the Parikram Marg. We used to take the children to, they were so fortunate they were born and grew up here. We used to take them to the Jamuna every day. But it was always crowded, and for a woman it was uncomfortable being around lots of crowds. So Bala Gopal and I ventured out a little. We found a really idyllic spot. Nobody was there, and it was just such a peaceful place to take the kids and to bathe. So one day we invited Dhananjaya with us. And this is where I can kind of affirm that men are more intelligent than women. Because he said to us, he looked at us with a very puzzled look on his face, and he said, "Didn't you notice these little piles of ash here and there?" We had been bathing in the burning ghat. But it took Dhananjaya to point it out to us. Another time, Vrindavan is so rich, as we all know, that's why we're here. Offering us lots of lessons in life. Another time, I had a 4-year-old child and a 2-week-old child, and the Jamuna flooded. And it was rising 1 meter an hour. And at that time, there were only workers at the Goshala, and I didn't know what to save first. And I ran out to see how much more had the water rose. My knees were knocking, my teeth were chattering, I was shaking. And what did I see? There was a little hut just by where 2 Babajis lived. Now, the water had completely filled the hut. Only the roof remained. They had their pot, spoon, their scripture, their book stand, and another piece of cloth, and maybe their chapels. And what were they doing? They were diving into the water and saying, "Kitna kripa hamara paas hai." They were saying, how fortunate am I that the holy river Jamuna has washed our home. And at that moment, I took a very deep breath, and all the stress left. And I could just hear, if you don't have a lot, you can't lose a lot. And that's something that I've carried with me all through life and told many people. Vrindavan was filled with lessons. Another lesson. Okay. So I had 3 children in Vrindavan, so in a 5-year period, which kept me occupied. And when I was just about to give birth to the last child, 3 weeks before, my 2-year-old child, Radharani Chanda, died from cerebral malaria. So in this festival, I was talking to one devotee, and he was saying, "Oh, we were young. Really, the philosophy didn't sink in too much at the time." And I thought, losing a child and then having to give birth 3 weeks later is not an easy feat, and it's very rich with learning. But it was the philosophy that Prabhupada gave, and it was the sensitivity, the love, and the depth of my god sisters and god brothers that carried me through that amazingly. So that's the potency, that's the test. Times of crisis or real critical times, this philosophy makes us immune to whatever can happen. And that's the riches that Prabhupada gave, even at a young age. That's the potency of it. Another story was I did quite a few things at different portfolios. Basically, just whatever was needed, I did. There was a time when I cooked for the Gurukula school and used to take a tunga to Mathura, and the sabji wala we had was really giving us very poor quality and taking the money. So we tried to get it back into our hands and get some very nice things going for the Gurukul school. So during that time, while I was at the sabji market, and Vrindavan again, it was someone's livelihood, and he virtually threatened my life if I continued with it. But I did anyways, and I'm still here. And a wonderful story is I was in New Zealand just a few years back, and this very tall Indian gentleman came up to me, and he was smiling, and he said, "You don't recognize me, do you?" And he was one of those Gurukula boys, and he told me the story that one day I was sick, and because I wasn't cooking, all the boys went up to the Gurukula and started banging instruments. So that's the richness of what we were able to engage in. No qualifications, but Prabhupada gave us opportunities, early 20s, twice, meeting Indira Gandhi and giving books, meeting ministers to get grants. No qualifications except for the mercy of Guru. In those days, we got a lot of causeless mercy. And I think I'll leave it there. I'd like to say one other thing. I'd like to say lots of other things, but I'll keep it short. Coming back to Vrindavan, I've come back after 24 years. And chanting in the Samadhi Mandir upstairs. Has been such an experience. Being able to look at that spot where we stood while Prabhupada's body was being put in that Samadhi Mandir, packed with 7 feet of salt. And by the way, one day we saw bags and bags of salt being delivered before Prabhupada left. He arranged his own Samadhi ceremony. He planned for it. And getting to experience the all-night kirtan with Prabhupada on the Vyasasana. Coming back to Vrindavan and being able to chant in that Samadhi Mandir, knowing his body is there. Coming back to Vrindavan and seeing it animated in a way that I could never, and I know Sarabi was saying the same thing last night, could never dream. Hearing Prabhupada's name being chanted in all the shops. I've never felt that Prabhupada is left. I've never felt that. Have you? Never felt it. But I feel his presence so strong here. And I feel him directing everything. The opportunity to be in Vrindavan Dham, and I want to thank Sarabi. I was looking at every design in that Samadhi Mandir. Just such an offering of love. I want to thank all the devotees who have stayed in Vrindavan all these years, serving under the most difficult circumstances, all of you. And particularly Daiva Shakti, 42, 43 years in Vrindavan. Something I should have done, something that Prabhupada time again, both with my husband and myself, said, stay in Vrindavan, never leave Vrindavan. I took a detour. But I thank those devotees who stayed, and I pray for their blessings that we can return. And I thank all of you for this opportunity, for your association. In Guru Das's words, you are a family, and a family that can't be replaced. So, Jai, thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. I'm not sure where to begin, from London, or I'm looking at some Mayapur Vasis here, and I'm getting inspired from that time in Mayapur. There's a story I think you might enjoy. No, I can't tell that. I can't tell that. There's a few in Mayapur. I'll begin with one. The daily cooking for Prabhupada, and after I used to cook with Pishima at that time, but Palika left the party in Mayapur in February. We had gone from Bombay, and then I went to Varda, and then we went to Kumbh Mela, and then we went to Bhubaneswar, Calcutta, and Mayapur. And by that time, she left, Harisari left during the Mayapur festival also. And so at any rate, Pishima was there. And at that time, Prabhupada started, he was beginning to get ill off and on. Started in Bombay when I mentioned that, I don't know if I did mention, but he started to get ill in Bombay, and the Kaviraj said he shouldn't be eating salt or ghee. So he came in the kitchen and cooked for several days. Harisari was there, Palika was there. Were you there in the kitchen? Yeah. And it was quite a treat to watch Prabhupada cook in the cooker. And I'm jumping all over, I have a very vata mind. But when he cooked, and he basically, and he made the chapati dough, and he made 16 chapatis, and he said, this is for 4 men, not big men, gentlemen. He said, now you can wait till it's done and go sleep for 45 minutes. Were you in there? Because I think it was Palika, myself, Prabhupada, and Harisari. So at any rate, I went in, I was going on to Calcutta because Prabhupada was going to be coming, and I went into his room one night to tell him goodbye, and I just peeked around the curtain, and he saw me and nodded to come in, and I picked some night queen. They were growing all over Bombay. When I came in, I gave him the night queen, and he closed his eyes, and he just like went somewhere. And I waited and waited, and it was like he was somewhere else, and it became awkward, so I paid my obeisances to leave. So as I was in my obeisances, he started speaking to me, and I popped up. And he was taking these flowers, and he said, this smell is Krishna. He didn't say it's...
This afternoon, Brahmananda Prabhu and his little brother, Gargamuni Prabhu, they'll be here for the session this afternoon for 2 hours. And I'm sure it's as 4 o'clock, 4 to 6 or 6:30, however long it goes. And I'm sure you're all going to want to hear what they have to say. Both of them, of course, joined ISKCON the very beginning. Srila Prabhupada's first disciples in 26 Second Avenue. And from the very moment, they've been very faithful servants to Srila Prabhupada. Brahmananda Prabhu, I had, of course, the great pleasure of being with him. Many occasions I was Prabhupada's servant, and he was Srila Prabhupada's secretary. So we spent a lot of time together. And I'm looking forward to being here this afternoon and seeing him, so it's going to be a wonderful treat. I could tell one, well, Gargamuni, of course, I knew from Calcutta Temple. When I first arrived in India, he was temple president in Calcutta Temple. And he was they're both very, very attached to Srila Prabhupada, very much so. Brahmananda, I know I was with him in Mayapur, I was with him in Brahmananda. We shared many things together. We both had jaundice traveling with Srila Prabhupada. I know in Bombay, I was just a devotee for 2 months, and I didn't even know what I had. One morning walk, Shyama Sundar looked at me and started laughing. This, of course, is how we related to one another when we saw each other get ill. So he laughed at me because he looked into my eyes and he said, "Your eyes are really yellow." He said, "You have jaundice." And somehow or other that made him happy. And so we went back to, it was Kartikeya Mahadevi's house. This was 1973, the very beginning. So there was nothing in Bombay or Juhu at that time. We were staying at a life member and very dear friend of Srila Prabhupada, Kartikeya. And I went back to the place and Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there. So, of course, I told him, I said, I have jaundice. And I was feeling, of course, very, very weak, but I was still going on the morning walks. I had been cooking, and he immediately chastised me, and he said, well, you can't have anything to do. You can't serve Prabhupada. He said, if you have jaundice, he said, it's very contagious. And I said, oh, okay. He said, especially you can't touch his plates, you can't cook, nothing, he said. I said, oh, okay. So naturally, being Prabhupada's servant, and I just went right into Prabhupada's room, offered obeisances, and I sat up, and I said, Prabhupada, I said, Tamal Krishna Maharaj said I shouldn't continue my service because I have jaundice. And Prabhupada looked at me very seriously. He said, really? He said, what are the symptoms? I said, well, my eyes are yellow. I said, and my urine is brown. And I feel very weak. And again, he looked at me very seriously. He said, perhaps I have jaundice. So this was Prabhupada's sense of humor. And then I said, well, I said, the point was that he said, I can't do anything for you. He said, because you might get jaundice from me. And he just looked at me. He said, just do your service. He said, don't worry about it. He said, I'll be okay. So that was 1973. So 2 years later, 2 years had gone by, so much service, so much travel. And now Brahmananda is Prabhupada's secretary. And he had jaundice. Now, one of the things when you have jaundice, of course, your digestion is very bad. Nothing functions very well. But even in that state, Brahmananda, of course, you have to eat, right? So we were all sitting in the quarters, you know, where all the entourage was, like the servant quarters. So myself, Brahmananda, and Pradyumna are sitting there, and we're having lunch. So we're having regular lunch, rice, dal, chapatis. But because he had jaundice, Brahmananda was only eating steamed vegetables. But he had a plate that was about that big. It was like a mountain of steamed vegetables. And Prabhupada walked through to use the bathroom, and he saw it. And he said, are you going to eat all of that? And Brahmananda went, yes, Prabhupada. He said, okay. He said, as long as you're going to eat all of it, he said, that's okay. And then he went to the bathroom. Then he came back, and later I went into Prabhupada's room, and he said, why is Brahmananda eating like that? I said, he has jaundice, Prabhupada. And he said, oh, what are the symptoms? And me, with no memory of what happened yesterday, what to speak of 2 years ago, I run down the symptoms. And I said, his eyes are yellow. I said, he's very weak. His digestion is bad. His urine is brown. And Prabhupada looks at me very seriously and says, perhaps I have jaundice. When I was with him, just before we went to Bombay, I went to India and for the first month was in Vrindavan. And it was just ecstasy. And after that month, it kind of went downhill. My health, I had malaria, and that was my first illness, and that was in Ahmedabad. And I was very sick for the first time, what I considered the first time in my life. I was 20 years old, and malaria is very debilitating, to say the least. And they took care of me there. They were also life members, and it was my first time. They brought a homeopathic doctor in. So right away, he gave me those little white sugar pills, and they gave me a bed to sleep in, and Prabhupada would come in, see how I was. So that went on for a few days. So then I started to feel healthy. And I was massaging Prabhupada one day, and I said, Prabhupada, I said, I've never been so sick. And he said, really? I said, yes. I said, I've always felt very healthy. I said, but I was so sick, Prabhupada. And he said, that's very wonderful. He said, our normal condition is we're diseased. He said, to be healthy, he said, that's very rare. He said, disease, he said, that's normal condition. But then as most things, when Prabhupada said it, you could, depending on your consciousness, you could take it on very simple level or very profound level. Because of course, we're always diseased. If we're in this body and we think we're this body, that's our disease, skin disease. So Prabhupada would say something and you could think, well, that's very simple. But it wasn't. It was also instructive. But this was the way it was to be with Srila Prabhupada. When does this? Okay. Does anyone else want to add anything? I'm sure all of you have been ill while you were here in Vrindavan. Daiva Shakti Mataji, she would tell you. The serving quarters is now what's just behind Prabhupada's sitting room, where they have display on the shelves Prabhupada items. In 1974, 1975, that was the serving quarters. And Prabhupada would walk through there to use the bathroom. And somehow or other, like, there was a special mosquito that just liked to live there, and it carried malaria. So every time we would go to Vrindavan, I would get malaria in that room. Because we never used mosquito nets, because we were transcendental. And the one time I was really suffering, and I had malaria, and there were no doctors, there was no one to assist you, and even I was lying on the floor. It was lunchtime, practically, and they all just kind of hands in their mouths and they're looking up. He said, call a doctor. He said, get him a doctor. He said, and bring a bed so he can lie down on a bed. Then he turned, and Palika was in the kitchen area. He said, Palika, make him a Nimbu Pani. He said, take care of him. And I'm lying there going, yay. Thank you, Prabhupada. So these were the ecstasy, some of the other sides, huh? When you were here in Vrindavan, besides all the service that was going on, it was performing this service under very difficult conditions. We had no bottled water everyone was passing around. Whatever water was available, you would drink it, Yeah, salty, very nice. And, but somehow or other, Prabhupada managed everything, and he really did take care of us. And it was the one thing, and I was telling Panchagoda, just like this festival, the first festival, one of the things I saw Prabhupada stress was taking care of the guests. Take very nice care of the guest. And he was telling, because he called all his GBCs to come, they were the managers, Jayatirtha and Bhavananda, and the different ones. He put them in charge. They were like temple commander, the head cook, the head pujari. They wanted to oversee. So Bhavananda, he oversaw the cleaning because that was his expertise. Everything first class clean, Pukka. But then Prabhupada was stressing everyone that come, they must have a nice place to stay. And he said, nice prasadam. And he said, cow's milk. He said, everyone attending, he said, they should all get cow's milk. And then he stressed, not buffalo milk. He said, cow's milk. He said, everyone needs to get cow's milk every day. So in this way, Prabhupada set the standard, not just for first-class worship of the deity and first-class temple, but it was first-class Vaishnava care, taking care of everyone that attended. So hopefully, all of you here who are living here, you help in taking care of all the guests so that everyone feels comfortable, everyone is cared for, and everyone wants to return to Vrindavan. So again, please come this afternoon, every morning and afternoon to attend these seminars, the remembrances by all the devotees. So thank you very, very much. We'll see you then. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.